You are not an emotional person. You are a person who never learned to control yourself, and you built an entire identity on top of that so you would never have to face it. Every time you exploded, someone won, and it wasn't you. Every time you sent that message, raised your voice, left the room, went silent for 3 days as punishment, said exactly the most destructive thing possible because you knew it would land. You weren't being authentic. You were being predictable. And there are people in your life who know this better than you do, who know the path to your trigger with their eyes closed, who just need the right tone, the right word, the right pause, and they watch you detonate with the punctuality of a clock. You are the clock. They just know what time it is. And the worst part isn't even that. The worst part is what comes after. The justification. The narrative you build on top of the reaction to turn your lack of control into a virtue. I'm intense. I don't pretend. I say what I feel. As if releasing the animal is the same thing as having courage. It isn't. Courage is holding. Courage is choosing. Courage is being angry, real anger, legitimate, justified, and still deciding how you are going to act. Not because you are suppressing anything, but because you are the only adult in the room and someone has to be. Kant called this autonomy, not in the sense it became a self-help cliché. In the original philosophical, brutal sense, the only free person is the one who obeys laws they created for themselves through reason. Everything else is slavery with a different name. And you have been calling your slavery personality for years. Think about the last 5 times you reacted and regretted it. Now tell me, who was in control? You, or the reflex someone installed in you when you were too small to resist? Don't answer now. Sit with the question, because it will sit with you either way. If you're still here, you already know you have a problem. You just haven't admitted it out loud yet. That changes now. Here is what nobody tells you about reactive people. They are not too sensitive. They are not too passionate. They are not misunderstood souls with more feeling than the world can handle. They are people who were trained by every environment that rewarded the reaction. The household where volume meant being heard. The relationship where coldness was the only way to restore power. The friendship where emotional chaos was the price of belonging. You didn't become reactive because something is wrong with you. You became reactive because it worked. Once. A long time ago. In a context that no longer exists. And now you carry that mechanism into every conversation, every conflict, every moment of pressure, and wonder why the same situations keep producing the same damage. The mechanism doesn't know what year it is. It doesn't know that you're not 7 anymore. It doesn't know that the person across from you is not your father, not your first partner, not the teacher who humiliated you in front of the class. It only knows one thing. This feels like that. And the response that protected you then, it fires now. Automatically, efficiently, without asking permission. You call it being triggered. Psychologists call it an emotional hijack. Kant would call it something that cuts deeper than both of those terms. He would call it the failure of reason to govern itself. And he would not say it with sympathy. He would say it with the quiet, relentless insistence of a man who spent his entire life arguing that the capacity for reason is the most valuable thing a human being possesses, and that wasting it, surrendering it to impulse, abandoning it in the moment it is most needed, is the closest thing to a genuine moral failure that exists. Kant would not be gentle about this. He spent his entire life arguing that a human being who is governed by impulse is not yet fully human, not as an insult. As a philosophical position, the capacity for reason is what separates you from every other animal on this planet. And every time you react without thinking, you voluntarily hand that capacity back. You step down from person to mechanism, from subject to object, from someone who acts to something that moves when pressed. And the people who press you, they didn't earn that power over you. You gave it to them, freely, repeatedly, every time you proved that they could predict you. If you're still listening at this point, you're probably someone who has watched themselves react and felt for just a second like a stranger in their own body. That moment of watching, that split second of witnessing your own explosion from the outside, is not weakness. It is not proof that you are broken beyond repair. That moment of watching is the beginning of the gap, and the gap is everything. Let's talk about what a response actually is, because most people have never had one. They think they have. They confuse a delayed reaction with a response, a quieter explosion with a considered reply. But a genuine response is something most people encounter only by accident, in situations where the stakes were high enough that they force themselves to slow down. A reaction is automatic. It lives below thought. It is your nervous system doing its job, scanning for threat, firing the appropriate chemical signal, moving your body before your mind has been consulted. That system kept your ancestors alive. It is also destroying your relationships, your reputation, and your ability to think clearly under pressure, because it cannot tell the difference between a predator in the dark and a colleague who used the wrong tone in a meeting. It cannot distinguish between genuine danger and bruised ego. It cannot separate the situation in front of you from every situation that ever felt remotely similar. It just fires. A response is something different entirely. A response requires a gap, not a long gap, not hours of reflection or a journal entry or 3 days of silence, a gap of seconds, the space between what hits you and what you do with it. That space is where your humanity lives. That space is where Kant's entire philosophical project becomes not an abstract idea, but a practical tool you can use in the middle of an argument on a Wednesday afternoon. And most people have collapsed it completely. They have trained themselves through years of rewarding impulsiveness, of validating every reaction as authentic self-expression, of confusing emotional honesty with emotional discipline, to make that gap so small it has effectively disappeared. So that stimulus and reaction feel like one continuous motion, like breathing, like something they couldn't stop even if they wanted to. But they can. You can. And here is the most uncomfortable truth of this entire conversation. You already know how. You have done it before. There are people in your life you have never exploded at, not because they never provoked you, but because something about the consequences made you hold. The power they had over your life, the impression you needed to maintain, the version of yourself you were performing for them, your boss, a judge, someone you were trying to impress. You found the gap. You used it. You chose your words. So the question is not whether you are capable of response. The question is why you have decided that some people deserve your worst and others get your best, and what it says about you that the people closest to you, the ones who matter most, the ones who will be there when the performance stops, are usually the ones who get the least of what you're capable of. Think about that for a moment. The people you love most are the ones you protect least from yourself. That is not intensity. That is not passion. That is not authentic connection. That is what Kant would call a failure of the categorical imperative, the principle that you should act only in ways you would want universalized. If everyone treated the people they loved as safe targets for every unprocessed emotion they carried, what kind of world does that create? You already know the answer. You've lived in that world. Maybe you grew up in it. Kant was not born disciplined. This is the part that gets edited out of every respectful biography and every philosophy textbook that turns him into a marble statue with a powdered wig and no interior life. He was born into poverty in Königsberg, Prussia, in 1724. His father was a harness maker. His mother died when he was 13, a woman he described decades later, with an emotional precision that made it clear the loss had never fully resolved. He grew up in a household shaped by strict pietist Christianity, a tradition that valued emotional restraint, moral rigor, and the suppression of impulse to such a degree that it was almost suffocating. And he rebelled against it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way that matters more, intellectually. He spent years questioning whether restraint had any real philosophical foundation or whether it was just another cage dressed in virtue. He watched people around him use discipline as performance. He watched institutions use order as control. He watched the church demand obedience, not because obedience was rational, but because obedience was convenient for those who required it. And he asked the one question nobody in his environment wanted answered. Is there a reason to control yourself that doesn't come from fear? Not from punishment. Not from shame. Not from the terror of what happens if you don't. Is there a reason, a real, philosophical, internally generated reason to govern yourself that comes from inside you rather than from the world pressing down on you from outside? For 11 years, 11, he barely published. He read everything. He thought constantly. He walked the same route through Königsberg every single day at the same hour with such regularity that his neighbors used him to set their clocks. Not because he was obsessive, not because he was rigid, because he had decided that the body's rhythms should serve the mind, not the other way around. The walk was not entertainment. It was practice, the deliberate daily practice of a mind training itself to move on its own terms. He was building the gap. And then, in 1781, at the age of 57, he published The Critique of Pure Reason, one of the most demanding works in the history of philosophy. A book that took most of his readers years to understand, and many of them never did. And 3 years after that, the work that answers the question he had been carrying for over a decade, the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. His answer, after 11 years of silence, was this: you are free, genuinely free, only when you act according to a principle you would give to every rational being. Not a rule imposed from outside, not fear of consequence, not what your body demands in the heat of the moment, not the reflex that your history installed and your environment reinforced, a principle you chose, with your full reason, in advance, in the cold light of clarity, not in the hot middle of provocation. He called it the categorical imperative. And what it means for this conversation, stripped of all the academic language, is one brutally simple test. Before you act, ask yourself, if every person in a situation exactly like mine did exactly what I am about to do, what kind of world does that create? Most reactions don't survive that question, because most reactions are not principles. They are panic. They are wounded pride. They are the 7-year-old who finally found a way to make the pain stop and never updated the software. Kant sat with Hume's challenge for 11 years before he responded. 11 years. David Hume had written something that dismantled one of the core assumptions of Enlightenment philosophy, something that should have provoked an immediate counter-argument from every serious philosopher alive. Kant read it, felt the full weight of it, and then said, nothing. For over a decade. Not because he was slow, not because he didn't have an answer, because he refused to respond before the response was complete. Because a half-formed answer, a reactive answer, an answer born from the urgency to defend rather than the desire to be right, was worse than silence. Because he understood something that most people never learn. The quality of your response is a direct measure of the quality of your mind. How long do you sit with something before you respond? Honestly, not as an aspiration. How long before you send the message that cannot be unsent? How long before you say the thing you will spend the next week wishing you hadn't? How long before you make a decision from anger that you will still be managing the consequences of in 3 years? Now, let's make this real. Because philosophy that stays abstract is just decoration for a mind that doesn't actually want to change. You are in a meeting. Someone takes credit for your work. In front of everyone. Casually, confidently. Like it was always theirs, and the thought that it might not be simply never crossed their mind. What happens in your body in the next 4 seconds? You know what happens. The heat moves up through your chest. Your jaw tightens. Something narrows in your vision. Your hands may actually move. And the version of you that is 4 seconds away from speaking, that version is not thinking about consequence. It is not thinking about strategy. It is not thinking about how this moment will look from the outside, or what the most effective response would be, or what outcome you actually want from this conversation. It is just moving. The person who reacts in that moment says something they regret, damages a professional relationship, confirms to everyone watching that they cannot handle pressure, and spends the entire commute home rehearsing what they should have said instead. The person who responds does something that looks, from the outside, almost like nothing. They breathe. They let the heat rise and pass through without acting on it. They wait 2 seconds longer than feels comfortable. And then they speak. Not from the wound, but from the position. Clearly, calmly, without aggression, and without apology. In a way that is so measured, so precise, so obviously chosen rather than automatic, that it is more unsettling to the room than any explosion could have been. Same situation, completely different outcome. The only variable is the gap. Here is another one. Someone you love says something careless. Not cruel, careless. They weren't trying to hurt you. They spoke without thinking, touched something old, activated something buried. And what they said has almost nothing to do with them. It landed on a wound that existed long before they arrived. The reactive version of you makes them pay for the full history, for every person who ever made you feel that way, for the original wound they had nothing to do with and no way of knowing existed. You deliver the sentence that ends conversations. You say the thing that will still be in the room 6 months from now. The responsive version of you notices what is actually happening, recognizes the heat for what it is, old pain, not new threat. Asks the question Kant would ask. Is my response proportional to what actually just happened, or to the accumulated weight of everything that ever felt like this? And speaks from that clarity. Not from the debt. This is not suppression. This is precision. There is one more. And this one matters. Someone disrespects you publicly, deliberately. They have calculated, consciously or not, that your reaction will be worse than their provocation. that you will become the story, that the moment you explode, they win. Because now nobody is looking at what they did. They are looking at what you did. And they are right. If you react, your silence, your measured, chosen, deliberate refusal to perform is the only move that takes the power back. Not because silence is passive, because silence, in that moment, is the loudest possible statement that you are not governed by what they do. Silence is the most aggressive thing you can do to someone who needs your chaos to win. Kant's daily walks were not about exercise. They were a practice in exactly the same thing he was building philosophically, the structured, chosen, deliberate movement of a mind that had decided once not to be governed by accident, by mood, by whatever the morning brought, by the weather inside or outside. He was not repressing his impulses, he was making them irrelevant. That is the distinction most people miss. They think the goal is to feel less, to go cold, to build a wall thick enough that nothing lands anymore and call the numbness discipline. They confuse the absence of reaction with the presence of control. Those are not the same thing. Kant felt everything. He was not a stone. He was a human being who lost his mother young, who knew poverty, who spent decades in intellectual solitude, who carried the specific loneliness of a mind that moves at a speed the people around it cannot quite follow. He had preferences, irritations, the full weight of human feeling. He didn't stop feeling. He stopped letting feelings file the paperwork. He felt the anger and let it exist. He didn't perform it. He felt the frustration and let it inform him. He didn't obey it. He felt the urgency of every reaction and asked quietly before he moved, "Is this me, or is this just what happened to me?" And that difference between feeling something fully and letting it govern you is the entire distance between a reactive life and a free one. You are going to be provoked again. Today, probably. Tomorrow, certainly. Someone is going to use the wrong tone, say the wrong thing, make a decision that affects you without consulting you, dismiss something you worked for, ignore something you needed, move through the world in a way that costs you something real. And in that moment, everything in your nervous system is going to demand a reaction. It is going to feel urgent. It is going to feel righteous. It is going to feel like the honest thing, the real thing, the only thing that makes sense given what just happened. What Kant is asking you, what this entire project is asking you, is one question. Who is making the decision? Is it you, the person with reason, with values, with a considered understanding of what kind of human being you have decided to be and what kind of life that person builds? Or is it the reflex, the old program, the stored wound, the version of you that was formed under pressure in conditions that no longer exist, still running, still firing, still making decisions for the adult standing in the room? Because both of them live in you. Both of them will always live in you. The question is not how to destroy one. The question is which one you keep handing the keys to. Every time you react without choosing, you vote for the reflex. You tell it. You are still in charge here. You tell the people around you, I can be predicted. You tell yourself, in the part of you that is watching, I still don't trust myself enough to pause. Every time you find the gap, even for 2 seconds, even imperfectly, even in a situation where you still said something you regret, but slightly less than you would have, you vote for the person you are choosing to become. Kant didn't become disciplined because he was born without impulse. He became disciplined because he decided, once with full clarity and no performance for anyone else's benefit, that he would not be governed by what he hadn't chosen. you can make the same decision. Not once and forever. That is not how this works. You will make it on Monday and lose it on Thursday. You will hold through 100 small provocations and collapse on the one that hit the oldest wound. You will spend weeks building the gap, and one bad morning will remind you how close the reflex always is. That is not failure. That is the work. Every day, every provocation, every moment where the heat rises and the gap opens, and you have exactly 2 seconds to decide. Again, still, always, who is standing in that room. You are not what provokes you. You are what you choose in the 2 seconds after. And those 2 seconds are the only place where you are ever truly free.